Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another VLGA LGIU Global Executive Live Panel. 5 years of panels. Can you believe it? We're celebrating with this evening's session, or this morning, wherever you are joining us around the globe. We're going to talk about a very hot topic for local government and indeed people who work in the public sphere. Civility in public life is our topic tonight. My name is Chris Eddy, and I'll be your host for this session. We have a truly global panel joining us this evening to give you some insights, perspectives, and learnings from around the world into this massive issue that affects councils. How do we respond to the rise in incivility towards our elected representatives and staff, both from within the chamber and increasingly from the public? We have a lot to get through this evening, so let's kick things off. The VLGA would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Victoria and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to the traditional owners, their elders past, present and future, and to their cultures. I'll introduce you to our panel members in just a moment, but firstly, to say a few words of welcome, I'd like to call on Jonathan Carr-West, the Chief Executive of the Local Government Information Unit. Hello, Jonathan, and welcome.
Thank you, Chris. It's really great to be here again for another one of these executive live panels with VLGA. And as you said, we've been doing this for 5 years now, so it's an amazing partnership that we're very grateful to be a part of. And for us, these are part of our Future Local Lab, where we try to bring local government officers, professionals, and elected members around the globe together. So I'm really delighted to see that we've got a lot of LGIU members from the UK, from Ireland, from Australia with us here. So welcome. Thank you to all of you. For those of you who perhaps don't know LGIU, we're a membership organisation that's been supporting local government for over 40 years now, and we've got more than 300 councils in membership across the UK, Ireland, and Australia. And one of our core beliefs at LGIU is that we need to learn from each other around the world because, and I guess this is another one of our core beliefs, we think that, we know without a doubt, some of the most innovative and effective answers to global challenges come from local government. But we also know that for people who are in the thick of it, doing it, finding the time to connect with colleagues in other countries, sometimes in other councils next door, sometimes in your own council, let alone with other countries, it isn't easy. So that's why we do these panels. So our Future Local Lab is a central pillar of that. It's a programme of resources that's designed specifically to help local government prepare for and respond to emerging challenges, because we think whatever that future global trend is, whether that's climate change, whether it's demographics, whether it's the economy, whether it's technology, the impacts of all those massive things, they come home to roost and are felt in local communities, and they're dealt with by local government. So, we're all there and we're all seeking the solutions to those issues, and indeed some local issues, housing, aging populations. We all have to find answers to that. Now, today, we're focused on a topic that sadly, I think, does impact local government, staff and councillors pretty much everywhere, and that I think has pretty serious ramifications for the future health of our sector and of local democracy in general. So we've got a brilliant panel. They're going to be getting into issues around the rising hostility, the increased lack of trust that's directed towards local government. And before we hand over to them, I just wanted to give a tiny snapshot of some new polling that we carried out in England just ahead of our recent local elections. And if anyone at any stage wants to have a conversation about English local government, local election results, I'm here for you. Reach out and I can give you the lowdown. But we found 64% of people don't feel like they know what councillors do. They don't understand how decisions are made within the council. 54% of people don't trust them, don't trust councillors. Now, I'm sure that those two figures go hand in hand. They're part of a sort of ecosystem that's fueling declining civility in public life that we're all experiencing. So I don't know the answers to that, but I'm really interested to hear from the panel, to hear the approaches that different councils around the world are trying out and thinking about some of the efforts that they're making to counteract this, because I think that resetting that relationship between councils, elected representatives, residents. That feels like the vital task that's in front of us. So really looking forward to hearing about it this morning / evening. And with that, I'll hand back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. Interesting to hear those figures. Every day I see a story come across my news feeds of someone being impacted by this issue in public life. Just today I read about an English council leader who's resigned, talking about political hostility coming from within the sector, which is very concerning. I'd like to hand over now to Catherine Arndt, who's the CEO of the VLGA, who was going to say a few words of welcome and talk about, I think, a little bit about the recent VLGA councillor census.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Jonathan. The VLGA is delighted to have been partnering with LGIU over the past 5 years to bring these really important discussions to you. We support local councils and councillors in delivering community services through good governance and effective leadership. We really focus on that governance element. So how do we support those elected representatives and the staff that work with them to truly deliver remarkable public service to their communities through good governance? This is such a timely discussion. Last year, the VLGA conducted the first ever Victorian councillor census. We did that with support from Kudos Research, who were responsible for collecting the data and ensuring the complete anonymity of respondents. Over 300 councillors across Victoria out of a total pool of just over 600 responded to the census, and the response rate was which was more than 50% of the cohort, demonstrated the desire and the need for this sort of data to be captured. As I said, it was the first time a census of this kind has been undertaken in more than a decade. Why was it needed? Well, we felt that the census addressed a significant information gap and provided some insights in how the sector could respond and be better placed to support and empower councils to be successful in their roles in the future, and in particular how councillors could be successful in their roles. Up until now, we didn't really have a lot of tangible data to support what we were hearing anecdotally from elected representatives. And we weren't surprised by the findings, but it did reinforce, just as Jonathan Carr-West mentioned, the survey that they'd undertaken has reinforced that it's time for action now. What it told us was that one of the most significant findings of the census was identifying the challenges and barriers currently preventing women and men from restanding as councillors. We found out that the primary motivators, not surprisingly, to become a councillor were community service and a desire to enact change. A lot of people who did stand and became a councillor and answered this survey indicated that they didn't really have a clear understanding of the strategic nature of the role initially. And I think that also relates to a lack of understanding by the voters themselves about truly what is the role of an elected representative at local government level. Unfortunately, civility was something that was highlighted, or incivility was something that was highlighted in the results of this census. A significant number of councillors did not expect the level of hostility that they encountered, especially from other councillors. More than 80% of the respondents had experienced threatening or intimidating behaviour in their role as a councillor, as I said, from both members of the public but also fellow councillors. Disappointingly, 41% of women and 26% of men indicated that they'd regularly experienced threatening or intimidating behaviour from others. Bullying and harassment were identified as key factors for councillors, particularly women councillors, not to restand for election. So this is a critical tool, this census, which the VLGA has committed to undertake annually and will inform our sector advocacy and work into the future. We have a plan to respond. We're looking to expand our current Local Women Leading Change program, which supports and now empowers more women to nominate and also get elected in elections. We'd like to develop an EAP register for councils to provide health and wellbeing support for councillors. We'd like to formalise the VLGA's advice network to provide councils with expert advice. We have already rolled out a comprehensive councillor professional development program that aligns with recently introduced mandatory training guidelines. We've had great success in the community leadership programs that we've run in lead up to local government elections, where potential candidates learn more about the role of being a councillor. So we're looking at expanding those programs. And as I indicated earlier, we're committed to undertaking this census on an annual basis. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks very much, Catherine, for that overview, and we look forward to seeing how that body of evidence builds over time. All right, before I introduce our panelists, just a couple of housekeeping notes. We have a chat function and a Q&A function. If you have questions for our presenters, please use the Q&A box. That's live now. We'll endeavour to get through as many of those as possible during tonight's session. The chat function is available for you to be making any commentary, discussion amongst other participants. You might like to jump on there and let us know where you're coming from, whether it's evening, morning, what part of the world you're in. As Jen has just said, a good morning there from sunny Kent. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all of those who've registered in the next few days. So let's get started with our discussion and introduce our panelists. We have joining us this evening Jo Miller, who is originally from the UK, but is currently the Chief Executive of Hutt City Council in New Zealand. Jo's local government career spans 30 years at a local, regional and national level. She's been the President at the LG Professionals of New Zealand since October 2023. So Jo Miller, hello to you.
Kia ora, Chris. Kia ora, everybody, and good evening from New Zealand.
Welcome. We'll look forward to chatting with you in just a moment. Jackie Weatherall is the CEO of Greater Dandenong City Council, which is located in the southeast region of Melbourne in Victoria, Australia. Greater Dandenong, as we'll hear when we chat to Jackie, is one of Australia's most culturally diverse municipalities. What sort of challenges does that present when we're talking about civility? I suspect we're going to find out. Jackie's been leading the council there since 2022 and has over 20 years of experience at a senior executive level in not-for-profits and local government. Jackie, good evening to you.
Hello, Chris. How are you? Thank you for having me this evening.
Excellent. Looking forward to chatting. I'm delighted to have Diane Kaelin-Sukra with us from Canada. We'll find out what time it is there in just a moment. Diane is the founder of the Kaelin Academy. Diane and I co-hosted the world's first online global summit last October with hundreds of participants from all around the world. Diane's been shining a light on this issue of civility for quite some time. She is a former city manager herself and tours the world speaking on this subject. So we're delighted to have her with us this evening. Hello, Diane.
Delighted to be here, Chris, with all of you again tonight.
What time is it?
It's midnight. It's midnight.
It is midnight. Thank you. Great to have you with us. Thank you for staying up late for us. Hannah Phillips is a policy professional and advocate researcher promoting civility and gender equality in public life. She's worked on local, national and international levels, including at the London Borough of Lambeth Council, and is joining us tonight from the Civility Commission, I beg your pardon, from the Joe Cox Foundation as Civility Commission Manager. Hello, Hannah, and welcome to you.
Hi, lovely to be here, and hello from Oxford in the UK.
Excellent. Great to have you. And Catherine Needham is Professor of Public Policy and Public Management at the University of Birmingham. She researches the public service workforce with a range of studies under the theme of the 21st century public servant. We're going to be talking about the latest research and how it compares with research done some years before. Catherine, thank you for joining us and hello to you.
Hi, Chris and everybody. Good morning from Birmingham.
Excellent to have you. So we've got all parts of the globe just about covered for this panel tonight. Truly global indeed. We're going to open the batting with Jo Miller, who's in New Zealand, as I mentioned, who's going to talk to us for a few moments on what she sees as the issues and the experience from leading councils in both New Zealand and the UK. Jo, looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
And amana and areo and rangatirama,
Tēnā koutou katoa. That's a Te Ao Māori greeting to all of you in the different parts of the world. And I was very excited to see Ecuador up there. So my greetings to you all. I thought I'd touch on some experiences of incivility and abuse, both overseas and here, some of my observations on that, and perhaps some tools to deal with it. And I'll be 6 minutes, and I've got my timer on, Mr. MC. So I'm going to follow the instructions. I think the first thing is incivility new? And I don't think it is. Sometimes it feels like it, but it isn't. I recall growing up in a council house, and Liverpool City Council weren't very good at repairing them at times, and very often there was a reference to the bloody council and what were the bloody council doing. However, I don't think it ever got personal. And of course, that was many, many years ago. And then I reflected on being a young officer, 22 years old, just the year before the internet got going, when Jonathan and others may recall that the poll tax was a very unpopular tax that was being collected from residents in the UK. I lived in Nottingham. I had to collect those taxes by going to court and asking for them to be collected. And some of the people I was asking that for were actually my neighbours in the same neighbourhood. And I recall in court being egged, people saying let the bitch turn around and face us, and dog excrement being put through my front door, which was pretty scary, age 22. But the difference was, I could shut that front door and there was nothing following me inside my house. So I think it's always been there, but is it getting worse? For sure. And we've just heard from Catherine about some of the stats in Victoria. In 2022, local government New Zealand surveyed people. 43% had experienced harassment or online abuse or in person. In 2024, that had expanded to 74%, and half had said the level and nature of it was getting worse. And I think some of that is the immediacy of social media. My observation, having left the UK in 2019, is post-COVID's made it a lot worse. I don't know if that's what everybody sees. And we know that attacks on council staff have significantly increased from intemperate language to worse. And I'm afraid just this afternoon I had to report an assault to the police on me and my staff member at an awards do last week. The woman may have been drunk, but it's not okay to try and push someone over and scream homophobic abuse. And I think sometimes the discourse in public life, which can become increasingly coarse, does not help. So it's there for sure. It seems to me that as a society, we have lost the ability to disagree agreeably. And I do think people take their cues from the very top and follow that. So look, what can be done? What can be done about it? And I really want to focus here on both organizations, about staff, and then also perhaps as a person, as an individual, how do I manage? So for organizations, we are really clear in our support to staff, from advising them on social media settings, giving them the ability to close down conversations. They might be at the barbecue or at the sports field when somebody wants to talk about the bloody council and what an awful job they're doing or something. So we give our staff the tools to manage that. We also give our staff particular training around dealing with difficult customers and how to de-escalate, or customers who are unhappy, and how to de-escalate it. We give the same support to elected members. How do you stay safe online? How do you protect your privacy? I'm obsessed about my privacy settings. I won't let anybody tag me in anything, because they're the photographs that end up on the front page of the newspaper when somebody's not very happy about something. And also, as organisations, we can use all of the legal avenues available to us when something goes wrong. I'm really clear that if I can't be safe, if my mayor can't be safe, how can we expect all of those around them to follow and do the things they need to do to support our civic society? So we let staff know that it matters. We let elected members know it matters. It's the election season here, so guess what? It's all getting a bit worse. We humanise our comms, and this I think this picks up with the point that Jonathan made. You know, we try and tell our story in words that people can understand, but also focus on real people. Quick example: landslip 2 years ago, community up in arms about they couldn't get out of their roads. The moment we talked about Ardy, who was the guy going abseiling down and fixing the landslip, it went from abuse to clap, clap, clap. And so I think that transparency about decision making really helps. And for individuals, I think we have to have skin that is thick enough not to be pierced by every arrow, but thin enough to be able to absorb public opinion and react appropriately. Some simple things to me: I don't answer my phone if I don't know the number. I let it go to voicemail. I said to you that my social media metrics are really high. My staff will sometimes say to me, have you seen what someone said to you on this? I call it the cesspit page. And I say to them, is it going to help my mental health? And they say no. I say, well, in which case, don't tell me. So don't think that the noise in social media is what everybody thinks. You know, find the whispers in the noise. They're just a few people. And finally, I'd say find your coping mechanism. I don't know if anybody's watched the Queen's Gambit with the chess. I don't know if you've watched that, Chris.
I sure have.
So she moves the chess pieces on the ceiling.
Yeah.
Every morning I have 3 buckets. I have my purpose bucket, I have my joy bucket, and for the polite conversation here, I have my fudget bucket. When I'm having a bad time with all this stuff, my fudget bucket fills right up and it drains my purpose. So each morning I look at my ceiling. After this assault last week, man, I needed some joy. And what gives me joy is on the front line with our community organizations. So find your coping mechanism. You're not alone. And make sure you find your joy bucket and fill it up, because this is not how it needs to be. Kia ora.
Sensational, Jo. Thank you. Some nuggets there already that I'm sure our audience can take away. It occurred to me while you were talking about that early experience with the poll tax, when you said, you know, it didn't follow you through the door. You could shut the door, you go home. Social media wasn't around then, was it? Now, that's what follows you, isn't it?
That's what follows us. And also, you know, my son, I've had a couple of issues here a few years ago. My son was 12 and he was coming in from school telling me what his mates were saying from their parents. And that's the bit that's really hard, because my family don't sign up for this.
Yeah.
So I think we've got to, again, explain to our families and insulate ourselves from that social media. Turn the damn thing off.
Yeah. All right, Jo, we'll hear some more from you, I'm sure, before the end of our session. Thank you very much for getting us off to such a great start. I want to move on to Jackie Weatherall, who is the CEO of Greater Dandenong City Council in Melbourne. Jackie, great to have you here. I mentioned at the outset that Greater Dandenong is one of the most culturally diverse municipalities, not just in Victoria, but I think in Australia.
That's
by
right.
any measure. Yeah. How is that in particular impacting this pervasive civility issue that elected reps and council staff members are dealing with? Does it add an extra dimension to it?
Oh, most definitely, Chris. I think that as the most multicultural municipality in Australia, we have 158 different nationalities, and many of them are new migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. And it's really important that our councillors and all our workforce need to be, you know, culturally aware and well trained in cultural awareness to deal with the complexities that come with the kind of municipality that we have. And for example, we adjust our style to suit the cultural backgrounds, but it doesn't mean accepting unacceptable behaviour. And I still think, you know, there's, as we were talking about before, there's a lot of strategies that you can adopt to educate the community about it.
Yeah. So you were telling me when we had a pre-session chat that some of your newest councillors are young, female,
That's
and
right.
from an Asian background in this case. They're finding it particularly difficult to deal with this stuff, aren't they?
Yeah, and they're really struggling with it. I've got 2 young Asian female councillors who are under 30, and I also have an Asian background male councillor. And I actually spoke to all of them in preparing for today. And one of the young female counsellors was telling me recently that she gets asked things like, "Are you the counsellor? You should be home having babies. You're too young. I don't want to speak to you." And she finds it very confronting. And she's only been a counsellor since October last year. We've worked hard to help her with training and resilience and ensuring that, she has the supports around her. But as she said to me, one night she came home from work and she'd had a rough day at work. And she listened to one of the messages on her phone, which was abusive and uncivil. And she said, I just burst into tears. She said it was just the last thing I needed at the end of a difficult day. So, how do we retain the talent in our workforce, the talent in our counsellors when they're being subjected to that kind of abuse?
Yeah, because it's not what they've signed up for. They would not have imagined they would be having to deal with that when they put their hand up to run for council, would they?
That's right, Chris.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's not just it's ageism, it's sexism, and it's racism as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And part of it is cultural too. That a lot of people in the Asian community, have a more misogynistic view, and they do believe in more traditional family values and that women should be home. But they've got to understand that in Australia, these women were all born in Australia. They're very bright, they're very intelligent, they're very well educated, and they've got a lot to offer in these roles. And they were elected by the community.
Yeah. So, what sort of advice do you give them, Jackie, to deal with this? Councillor Isa from Moonee Valley in the chat has made the point that elected reps can't really turn off their social media. They've got to, they've got to keep an eye on it to know what's happening. They can't leave their phone off for long periods of time because they need to be contactable. So, how do you advise them to manage these stresses?
Yeah, look, I think there's a range of ways. I think it's about focusing on the issue and not on them. And there's simple things you can do. And I was talking to this counsellor the other day, and I said, there's ways to say to someone, you know, uh, you know, I don't agree with you about your commentary about me that you've just made. I think the comments you made actually were misogynistic, sexist, and ageist. Perhaps we can focus on your problem with a tree outside your property and see if I can help you, like I've helped so many other hundreds of, residents in this municipality. Let's focus on the problem, not who I am, and get them focused on those kind of things. If we can train them to be resilient, if we can give them wording, if we can teach them through role play and mentoring, different ways that they can successfully deal with this stuff, then that will help them. But I also think it's really important to look at roles and responsibilities. And I think at the end of the day, yes, the community does have freedom of expression. That's great. But they also have a responsibility to be civil in the way they do it. And I think it's important that our councillors role play that. And if at the end of the day, despite their best endeavours to have someone be respectful, the person can't be respectful, I don't think it's appropriate that they should have to continue to service that resident on that occasion.
Yeah, because the fact is, some people cross a line, don't they? There's this rise of what is loosely called citizen journalists, but even some mainstream media, as we've seen play out in Golden Plains recently, where a councillor or a mayor's personal photo from being on holiday has been taken from social media and used in a negative way that's had a real impact there. How do we combat that stuff? Because we can't just stop it, can we?
No, we can't. And it's happened to me, Chris. If people Google me, there is a photo of me out at an Australia Day event with a sun hat and sunglasses on. And there was a photo that I had with a councillor, and I'm in a sundress out in the park. And it was a beautiful day, and it was a festival celebration type event. And every time one of the citizen journalists uses that photo, so it's a serious issue that's going on at council, and they pull that photo out to basically make me look incompetent or, disinterested. It's totally inappropriate to the kind of community issues that are being discussed. And it's misogynistic. It makes me look inappropriate. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, social media, we can't control it.
No, and Joe's already talked about a strategy to not be tagged and try and be a bit more invisible in those platforms, I guess, for want of for a better description. Some people are fighting back though, Jackie, and those are yet to be played out. But we've seen a mayor recently seek an intervention order. We probably haven't got time to unpack all of that, but there was one other thing I just wanted to explore with you before we move on to our next speaker, and that's the impact on staff working in local government.
Yep.
Because you tell me some people are actually opting out because of this dynamic that's at play, and good
Yeah,
people are being lost to the sector.
that's right. I think in a diverse community, many of our community are under a lot of pressure. They're new to Australia. They've got a lot of pressures. Some of them have been victims of torture or trauma. We have a lot of homeless people in Dandenong. We're a very disadvantaged community. And so many of the people who come in and seek assistance at the council office, for example, don't necessarily have a good understanding of what level of government they're talking about. Government is just government. They've come maybe from an authoritarian government in another country like Afghanistan, and they come to Australia and they expect that things are going to operate like they did in their home country, and they don't understand the rules and the normal approach to government in Australia. And their frustration comes out. They're already under stress, and then on top of that, they've got cost of living pressures. Sometimes they can't even afford to eat. And these people at the front desk are sometimes screaming at the staff. We have to have security in our customer service centres, and we need to ensure that we protect our staff as much as possible. But even with all the cultural awareness training, good education, good community engagement, great signage in our areas in multi-language, all the things that you would expect that Catherine was talking about before that we can do, even with all that, some staff just find resilient enough to dealing with that in the front desk environment, particularly people with mental health problems. It's really challenging.
Do you have some hope or confidence that we can get past these issues somehow?
Look, I think we can. I think by supporting our staff, we can. But the thing that frightens me is if we don't deal with it and we don't stand up to it, we will have either people leave the sector or people become apathetic as well. They're like, oh, here's another one, not really interested in their jobs, not engaging in what they're doing, not giving the best customer experience that they possibly could give. And our workforce could easily end up with mental health problems and other health problems as a consequence from the stress and strain of the role. So I think there's really serious implications if we don't address it. But I think it's a complex issue, particularly in multicultural communities.
Thank you, Jackie, for those insights. We'll let you take a breather, and I'm sure we'll hear some more from you before our session is out. I just want to remind folks about the Q&A box. If you have questions for any of our panelists this evening, there's already some discussion happening, which is great in the chat, and a couple of questions, I think, lining up that we'll get to as soon as we can. I want to cross to Canada now, live to Canada, where it's the wee small hours of the morning with Diane Kaelin-Sucre. Diane, you've been sitting there listening to these examples coming out of Australia, New Zealand, a little bit of historical info from the UK there. I know you look at Canada and even into the US. How does all of this align with what you're hearing from a broader perspective in your let's say across North America, for example?
It's incredibly consistent with the experience of civic leaders, really in all, I would say, Western democracies. And I think that was affirmed, Chris, during our Global Civility Summit for civic leaders, because we had about 50% of participants, there were 450, were from the United States, around 30% from Canada, around 20% from Australia, and the remainder from UK and 5 other countries. And the statistics that came out when we polled people were within single-digit percentage points between those countries. So similar to the poll results we've seen presented this evening for you, 81% of civic officials found that the impact of incivility on their local governments was disruptive or very disruptive. And about half said that they experienced acts of incivility frequently or constantly. And what was really alarming was that 20% of civic leaders said that their family members were targeted in the course of their work. But before I want to talk a little bit about how some of the developments, political developments since that Global Civility Summit that have happened in the United States and Canada that may actually be impacting these same countries, because incivility anywhere is a threat to civility everywhere. And because of this global world, there is the trickle down incivility that comes, that we all share. I just want to briefly acknowledge what Joe and Jackie were saying. When Joe talks about it's really important. It's true. Incivility has been with us forever. It is a constant battle to cultivate the garden of community, to become a self-governing people, to master the art of living and working well together. And what has happened, I think, to a large extent, is that it was primarily those who were more socially vulnerable that would have experienced the same type of incivility 20, 30, 40 years ago, either because you're new to town, or you're a vulnerable young woman, or you're from a different, from a different place, or there's something else that distinguishes you. What's different today is that everyone is subject to incivility. It doesn't matter how long you've lived in your community, doesn't matter how great your service is, it doesn't even really matter what your record is. And so, and at the same time, we have it is absolutely true, the increasing levels of diversity, the social media, the, COVID was definitely an intensifier and a catalyst. And, toxic political figures are also catalysts. However, there are two even deeper sources, I think, that we probably we may get some more time to get into. And I think it has to do with the breach of the social contract. The fact that, the stagnant wages, the increasing taxes, the lower service delivery. And this is what's happening in all Western democracies. And what we're seeing is that we have declining levels of trust in democracies and increasing levels of trust in autocracies around the world. So, it's definitely affecting us at the local government level. And so since we had our summit, it's been around 6 months, and there was the election of President Trump. And, obviously many people are emulating his style of leadership. And then there were the executive orders that got issued that, cut federal programs and funding directly to local government, creating all kinds of uncertainty and, desperation from local governments in terms of how they were going to respond to this. And then, of course, there was the popularity and the concern with DOGE, with the Department of Government Efficiencies. So we've always had a problem in the public service of not being sufficiently respected or understood. But now we have this supercharging of anti-government sentiment and disdain and expressions of contempt against public servants that is, very, very concerning. And of course, last year in the United States was the highest ever recorded number of threats of violence against public officials. And now, on a good note, in Canada, this very same phenomenon, the fact that our country was going to be annexed, or at least, President Trump wanted to make it the 51st state, and then we had the trade war threats, has had this interesting effect of defaulting to more centrist and less divisive, more unifying politics, at least for now. And I think a similar thing has happened. We had the election of the Prime Minister Carney, and a similar type of dynamic in Australia. However, there are very deep divisions in Canada that are actually affecting local governments. We still have a couple of provinces that are considering separating, and the leading province is actually making major transformations in the local government sector that may resonate with you. And one of the ones right now, the proposed legislation, is to remove codes of conduct from all local governments.
Really?
Yes, and their reasoning for that, and all enforcement, because they found that it was being weaponized. This is the rationale for it, and it was costly, and it was silencing dissent. So, and at another level, we have this rise of kind of the strong mayor powers in our country. So we have our largest province it was initially going to be piloted for a few different, for some small municipalities. Now half of them have been given strong mayor powers. So the mayor has the power of the CAO or the CEO, the city manager, to hire, fire, to introduce budgets, to veto bylaws, to pass bylaws with 1/3 council. So yeah, the potential for abuse is very, very large. And I'm sure you're experiencing I know you're experiencing very similar things in your countries.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Canadian political result and in Australia, because that has very much been painted as almost a shift away from the Trump style of politics. Whether that further develops, I guess, remains to be seen. Interesting, because we've already had some commentary coming through tonight about the weaponisation of code of conduct type procedures, and that's a question that we might come to a little later. But I've heard you, Diane, say that this issue of toxic cultures, it's not just a people issue, it's a governance issue. And I just wonder very quickly if you could explain what you mean by that and where that should lead us.
Well, yes. I mean, the statistics are grim on the impact of incivility. We've been talking about it tonight, and we're all aware, in North America, something like 40% of local government officials are considering stepping down due to harassment and abuse. Either they're avoiding controversial issues, they're not showing up in public spaces out of fear for their safety. We have councils that are paralyzed, local governments on the verge of governance collapse. We have a rise in elections by acclamation. So this is what I would consider it to be a threat, like any other threat. And civic leaders are responsible to not only take advantage of opportunities, but also to address threats. And I see this as like a risk management issue. So I see it as a primary responsibility of civic leaders to identify the problem, diagnose where their culture is in their community on the spectrum of culture, because there is a spectrum, and to treat it. And for that, I have a roadmap for renewing civic culture, but essentially both within the local government and in the community to develop a culture risk management plan, because the threat of incivility is that serious, and then ultimately repeat it because culture, the very word culture actually comes from the Latin word cultura, which means to cultivate. So it's something that we have to continually cultivate until we can have the type of culture that can support good governance and democracy.
Yeah. We do need to get to our last couple of speakers, but I just do want to ask you about this code of conduct stuff that we've talked about today, and efforts to curb by using those reforms, conduct and procedural reforms. You've argued culture change is what is required and it can't just be legislated. So what does that lasting civic culture transformation actually look like?
Oh my. You want the short answer or the long answer?
Preferably the short answer, but the meaningful answer.
It essentially involves civic culture transformation. I mean, legislating civility is costly. It's exactly as we've experienced it, and I think that some of the reforms that we're seeing, like the community civility initiatives or bridging divide, anti-polarization initiatives, the deliberative democracy experimentations, the experimentation with different democracy innovations, the need for civic education being so central. And this is a big innovation happening in the United States. We have there's some local governments, there's one in California that has 3 civic academies run out of its city hall, one for citizens, one for high schoolers, and one for its frontline staff. And because they're seen as kind of agents of the local government to spread the word. And also for local governments and their associations, as we're doing today, becoming more outspoken about and demanding those boundaries and setting the standard for civil conduct in our communities.
All right, Diane, take a pause there, and we will definitely come back to you, because I can see there's some questions that are going to be right up your alley when we get to audience Q&A. I want to call on Hannah Phillips now to join us, who's going to talk about the work of the Civility Commission, what it does and its role in encouraging respectful politics. Hannah, over to you.
Thanks so much, Chris. And it's just been great to hear what everyone else is saying, and a lot of what I'm going to say really chimes with the discussion so far. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Joe Cox Civility Commission work, and really interested to hear people's questions and reflections. But I've also got a timer, so I'll stick to time to ensure we've got some time for questions as well. If for those of you who might not know about the Joe Cox Foundation, the Joe Cox Foundation is a charity that was set up after Joe Cox MP was tragically murdered in 2016. And we work on issues that Joe was passionate about. You might have heard of the Great Get Together, which is coming up in June, which is part of our Stronger Communities work and our flagship event to bring together people in communities who might not normally get together. And then a big part of our work in the last couple of years has been around respectful politics. And the main project in the respectful politics work is the Joe Cox Civility Commission. And broadly, our work advocates for the implementation of recommendations to address the problem of violence, abuse, and intimidation of elected representatives on all levels of government in the UK. And obviously, very importantly, including at all the local levels of government. And we developed the recommendations back in 2023, 2024 by engaging with a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of expert groups, and obviously elected officials themselves. And in 2024, in January, we launched our call to action recommendations. And this year we did a kind of update, which I'll talk about. I want to talk a little bit about the problem. I don't think I can kind of briefly run through this because a lot of this has already been said, and the audience will know this, know the problem very well. But I just want to kind of give an overview about where we're coming from in terms of how we're understanding, this problem of violence, abuse, intimidation, and harassment in politics. So something that has been quite concerning, and some of the other panelists have touched upon, is more and more the problem has become normalized. It's not that abuse never happened before, but a lot of politicians, and particularly their staff, like local government officers and staff of members of parliament, told us that dealing with abuse was just kind of part of their job now. And that's something we're quite concerned about, this normalization. And this kind of quote from the former MP Heidi Allen about, nobody in any job should have to put up with this type of abuse. And Heidi Allen, as many other MPs in recent years, cited abuse as one of the reasons that she no longer is serving in elected office. Another part of the problem is that it takes a range of forms. So it's not just about online abuse, even though that is incredibly important, but particularly at a local level, we found in a lot of our conversations that there was, in-person abuse, shouting in the street. I think this example kind of shows, the property damage of a racist image being painted on the wall, and then posters being defaced and a tire slash. So it's a really kind of range of forms, and that's something we're obviously very concerned about. And again, I don't have to tell all of you that this is a problem about that impacts all levels of government, and particularly, as has been said, impacts that willingness of councillors to stand again or for people to enter politics in the first place. And of course, as already been said, we are very concerned with the group-based inequalities, and a lot of kind of more recent research is showing that there is a real concern among kind of equal participation. So this quote is from, or this piece of research was from members of Scottish Parliament, with a lot of them had feared for their safety, and that increased when you look at the women members of Scottish Parliament. Our recent piece of research by the Alan Turing Institute found that women and men who are active in social media, there's big gender differences about how comfortable they are to share their political opinions online. With I think it was three quarters of women uncomfortable sharing their opinions online. So again, that has real implications for kind of equal political participation. And of course, as we really talk about this issue, is impacting democracy. It impacts the people who are already serving, their staff and their families, as has been already been said, and it puts off people that might have come into politics in the first place. Kind of stat that really stands out to me is from Girl Guiding UK, who do a girls' attitude survey, and they found that over a third of girls were put off by doing certain jobs, including politics, because of the abuse that high-profile politicians get online. And again, that's really concerning about the kind of pipeline of democracy. So we wanted to try and address this issue. So we launched our kind of call to action, and the recommendations in our call to action were to partly to strengthen the work that is already, and a really good work that's already been happening. As a lot of you will know, after the tragic murders of Joe Cox MP and Sir David Amess MP in 2021, Parliament and police have really taken on more resources to protect MPs. And this year, was the first, or last year was the first year in which there were kind of more security support for local elections as well. And there now is a specific police support for local government elected representatives that's just been rolled out. So there has been real progress on these issues. But as you can see from the kind of diverse range of themes, we understand that this issue needs to be addressed in a multifaceted way. It's about kind of large scale culture change. Policies are really important, but we need to, address political literacy. We need to address, kind of as has already been talking about, and lots of different institutions from local government administrations, also political parties, and need to take concerted actions. So as I mentioned, this year we did an update of which recommendations have been adopted, which in progress. So I'll go through these briefly. So as I said, each local police force now has specific support for local politicians, which we were really pleased that that recommendation was adopted. And the police have really improved their training. So for example, during the elections last year, all police had like a screensaver that indicated their roles in election abuse. And even that kind of small change was really, really impactful and linked to all the training and guidance that was available. And then last year also was the first set of elections where candidate safety and security costs were exempt from election spending limits. And that seems to have had an important impact for candidates kind of taking on more security if they needed it. And the Electoral Commission also expanded its guidance for candidates last year about how to stay safe during the election periods. And then another recommendation we had for Parliament is to increase its guidance around staff and families. And that is something that they're taking on really seriously, and as well as already developed some guidance. They're developing more specific guidance, particularly working with families of MPs, which we think is really, really important. And then in terms of recommendations in progress, as you will know and understand, a lot of local authorities are very good at prioritizing members and the public and staff's security and well-being. But of course, it's not always uniform across various councils across the UK and indeed around the world. So our recommendations are around ensuring those security and wellbeing sources, as already been mentioned today, improving risk planning, particularly at council meetings, which is what a lot of people we spoke to talked about. They were increasingly a scene of kind of in-person abuse. And then in terms of kind of culture change and showing the commitment to civility, we recommend passing motions that have already been developed by kind of excellent local government organisations. And then in terms of Parliament, we're still kind of encouraging the take up of training, which of course this is also the case at the local level, is that even in the training and guidance is offered, it's not always taken up. So that's something that we want to keep thinking about. And of course, it's already been mentioned, is that it really starts from elected representatives modeling good behaviour. And that is something we are continuing to think about ways to implement. So really keen to hear about ways that have worked. We have a civility pledge that we developed jointly with Compassion in Politics. And obviously there's different opinions and research about how useful pledges are. I think it's an important marker of kind of intention and culture change. But of course, there will be more actions that can be taken. And one of the areas that we want to really look at is political media literacy training. It's been really interesting, kind of sobering to hear the stats about the lack of knowledge about local government and distrust, and that's something that we are really keen to think about how we can work with partners to address. And the other big piece is around political parties, consistently enforcing codes of conduct, and also particularly in the local level, how kind of independent candidates can make sure to model good behaviour and have accountability. And that is all from me. Apologies if I went slightly over, but hopefully that will give a good overview of our work. So thank you so much.
No, that's terrific, Hannah. It strikes me there's a lot in there, particularly with all those actions and recommendations that you've made. I wonder about the take up or the buy-in from all of those other stakeholders that need to be on board with what you're recommending. How's that going?
Yeah, so something we were really clear about was when developing the recommendations, it was a very collaborative process. So by the time the final report came out, no one was surprised. They had kind of co-created the recommendations, and we were careful, kind of thoughtful about creating recommendations that kind of strengthen the work that was already kind of happening. So, the police were already thinking about ways they could develop their training. And they said having us kind of state that in the report would really help them advocate internally and prioritize kind of increasing training. So we had recommendations that were not easy to implement, but where there was already kind of existing buy-in. And then there are areas that we went a bit further. So for example, like the mandatory training for elected representatives, we know that that's quite a high ask because, elected representatives aren't employees, so you can't necessarily force them, but we kind of wanted to have that in there as a suggestion or a push to kind of have that take up. So I would say overall we've had really good buy-in. I think the area where we're working on is with political parties, because we, particularly last year when we were trying to keep encouraging the adoption of some of these recommendations, it was quite a tough year because of all the elections. So we're working with political parties now, and they are actually, a lot of them are looking kind of at refreshing their codes of conduct after the election and doing kind of reviews about that. So it's hopefully a good time to kind of encourage political parties and others to think about how to kind of improve civility and so on.
Indeed, I'd love it if we had time to get into where you see that going with Reform UK starting to influence a lot of councils, because there's some pretty disturbing developments coming out of some of those early messages. But if we've got some time, we might come back to that for your thoughts. Let's get Catherine Needham in as our last speaker, and then we'll see how we can tidy this up with some Q&A and some follow-up commentary. Catherine is involved in some research into the life of the 21st century public servant and councillor, and you've got a body of this research, I think, over a decade or so now, Catherine, that you can share some insights with us.
Yep, thanks, Chris. So yeah, a lot of our work has been around looking at relationality in public services, and we particularly focused initially on officers and others working in local public service systems, and looking at kind of relationships as the intervention and recognizing the power of good relationships. I want to focus particularly on what we've done with elected members, so with councillors, and looking at really the difference between some original research we did on the 21st century councillor published in 2016, and then an update that we've had recently because of a feeling from our partners, which included Local Government Association, that it's been a very turbulent decade in public life, and we really wanted to kind of see how issues like the COVID pandemic and some of the kind of other factors which have been prevalent in the last 10 years had really changed things. So we did a new round of interviews up in the northwest of England with different types of councillors. And I mean, I think the COVID pandemic still looms large. I think somebody mentioned earlier that this has been a kind of perhaps a watershed in terms of behaviour, but I think that, combined with some of the public service austerity that we've seen, has made this a very difficult decade. So we've seen that kind of austerity really hitting hard on our public services. Coming out of COVID and all the kind of strains that put on public services and on communities, we also saw the cost of living crisis, pressures on communities, and combining that with climate insecurity. We're all coming from different parts of the world, and how that climate insecurity feels will feel different for all of us. But we know that it doesn't any longer feel like something which is happening in the future. It's about kind of extreme weather events which are happening in our communities now, and pressures on how we live and kind of living safely. So I think for people working in local government, there's this sense of kind of now it's about what can we do with very little money, and that makes it difficult, I think, for local government to sort of drive positive relationships with citizens. The channel shift of COVID, I think, is something that we've not talked so much about yet on this call, but I think that's been really important. And a lot of councillors in particular, I think, have found that very dislocating. Councillors are primarily people. They do their work through relationships. A lot of the councillors that we spoke to felt that they'd lost that kind of town hall connection with people. So that partly relates to kind of easy connections with communities and citizens, but also kind of that kind of more casual connection with the officers and with people kind of doing the work in the town hall, that sense of kind of feeling very dislocated in their own work. In terms of conversations with communities, there's obviously a kind of a trust factor. People talked about the kind of the need to tell the truth. Sometimes because we don't want to frighten voters, we put this sort of gloss on everything. But there are councils, including Birmingham, which are effectively bankrupt in the UK, and that clearly puts an enormous pressure on what's possible. So it's partly about telling the kind of the truth about that and helping people understand why that's happened and what the kind of positive route out of it is. But it's also, in that second quote here, a sense of kind of, we can kind of make sure we get the narrative right, that we may be cutting down some things, including perhaps day centres in this example, but some of those resources weren't working very well for us. They didn't necessarily help people connect. So there might be a kind of an alternative way of explaining and kind of taking citizens on the journey with us, of recognising that some of these offer opportunities to us to do things differently. We know from the conversation so far that relationships aren't always positive, so there is a real move to kind of focusing on relational public services, but we can't be too optimistic because relationships are not inherently nice. I think that's a great quote from Newman and Clark. They often reproduce inequalities, and we've heard some of that in the presentation so far. And councillors really talked about the lack of kind of pastoral support and how being a councillor is a very lonely journey. You have this sense of kind of, you're kind of the lightning rod for all the kind of tensions and hostility. And whereas if you're an officer, you may have kind of pastoral support, there may be kind of personal development opportunities. Councillors often lack that and don't have the support that they need. We've talked about social media. We had this kind of analogy of using social media in safe mode. That was kind of some of the ways that councillors were talking about it, whereas 10 years ago they'd seen it as a tool for new forms of dialogue with greater immediacy. Increasingly, the people we spoke to were using it in broadcast mode. So using it to tell people things, but not using it to get the comments back for all the reasons that we've heard. People talked about having two SIMs, two phones, just making sure that there is that sense of kind of disconnection and the abuse is not coming to you in your home at a time when you're trying to do something in your private life. And as others have said, there's a gendered element to this. So we spoke to councillors who'd had to take out restraining orders against people. The trolling and hostility online was a huge issue for people, putting people off becoming councillors. And several other councillors we spoke to were in either formal or informal networks with other women around kind of mentoring and support about how to get through this. We've got issues in the UK where councillors' addresses are still published online, and that's something that we're hoping to see a legal change to, but that clearly undermines people's sense of kind of feeling safe in their own homes. So I think we're really keen on recognising that there's some great potential that we can do through focusing more on councillors' potential and the people doing it well, working relationally. Some of that's about more honest communities, more honest conversations with communities, but also recognising that relational work is hard, that we need to give councillors support, that councillors are often having to explain very difficult circumstances to communities due to the financial context. We think there's more that councillors can do. An area I'm interested in, adult social care. We think that councillors can be doing more in their communities to really build on the latent power that they have about connecting people into informal forms of support rather than necessarily into formal services. But often councillors don't have the personal development opportunities in order to kind of build those skills, and I think that's an area that we can really address. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Catherine. Some really interesting insights there. I'm struck by that 10 years ago, it doesn't feel like it's that long, social media was fairly new, and there was, I think your words were, there was an optimism about it, and we've really done a complete about face on the way we view how it can and should be used in that 10 years, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think it's become much more mainstream. So I suppose perhaps when we were doing the original research, it was something that, you know, some councillors were really into and some were very wary of. One of the things that COVID has done is improve everybody's technical skills. That, you know, there's lots of councillors now jumping on a Teams call who would never have dreamed of being able to do that before the pandemic. That's all good. So that, you know, and kind of seeing the value of something like Facebook as a form of communication. But yeah, a real kind of sense, as we've heard from the other speakers, that these are not channels through which you get well-informed, helpful, supportive conversations, and that we need to be very wary of them.
The other thing that struck me there was that feeling that with more working from home, more remote working, that elected reps feel that they haven't got the same opportunities to build connections with public servants. I guess that local government can work differently from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I'm interested in perhaps Jo's view on whether she sees that as a barrier, because you've worked in the UK and you're working in New Zealand. Do elected reps generally have that sort of access to the public servants?
No, they don't. It is quite different. So the council has one employee, that's me. I employ everybody else. The councillors were used to, you know, wandering around the building and standing over someone's shoulder whilst they were doing a planning application. Actually, that was a problem for our staff because they felt intimidated. But we do have this channel called elected members requests, which means you can get a response within 24 hours to anything. I think that, you know, we have to think about technology and life has moved on. Our cities are growing from the time when you used to be able to phone Billy up about something. That's not actually how our functions are organized these days.
No, indeed. And I imagine, Jackie, Wetherell, your response to that would be pretty similar.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, sorry, to press the video off. There we go. Yes, very similar. I am the only employee of the council, and the councillors, you know, their role is generally to work with the community, and then they come into the chamber to make the strategic decisions. But I think there are some beautiful examples as well, though, of our councillors really stepping up to the plate. Our mayor at the moment has been a mayor for 20 years. He's a 6-time mayor. And like he's done some really amazing things in our community when we've had incivility. Like on one big community issue, he ran a peace summit and invited all the community leaders in, including the religious leaders and the police. And it was fantastic. Everyone signed up to it and a lot of the issues just dissipated. So it wasn't just, you know, us getting the police and going out and speaking to individuals. He used a community development approach to work with community. And I think really good examples like that work are worthwhile exploring. Why did that work and some other things don't necessarily work? And how do we build off that and learn from that?
Yeah, and often getting out from behind a keyboard and having face-to-face interactions is a big part of it, isn't it? Catherine Arndt, I want to bring in as the co-host usually of these events. Catherine, for Q&A section.
I think you've been carrying the load, Chris, but I'll come in now, and I just want to thank all of the panelists for sharing their experiences and also going through the work and their experiences in the, you know, truly global jurisdictions that you all come from. Jackie, I just wanted to also give a shout out to the story that was in The Age, I think it was a couple of weekends ago, about the Greater Dandenong municipality. And if anyone's interested in finding out more about Greater Dandenong and their history and the very diverse community that lives there and some of the experiences, Jackie, that you shared, that's an excellent source of information.
Great idea.
Yeah. Look, so much to talk about. I just want to say that everything that we've heard tonight is entirely consistent with the work that the VLGA has been doing. We've just completed a 4-year research project with La Trobe University and Melbourne University, looking at the political trajectories of women in particular, but it did survey men as councillors. All of the findings that you've shared with your various bits of research came through in those research papers and a lot of academic publications that have come out of that research. Similarly with the census, I was really interested, Diane, I think you were the one who talked about it being a risk management issue, this issue of incivility in civic life. I know recently when I was in discussions here in Victoria with our local government minister's office, I also shared with them the results of the VLGA census and said, look, if I were the state government or central government, as they're referred to in the UK, I'd be really concerned that there is a level of government that is created through state legislation where there are traumatised, because that's what the results were showing us, elected representatives. What can we do collectively to manage this risk? Some of the examples that we heard, I think there was talks about civic education programs and investing in those, investing in health and wellbeing, employee assistant type programs to support elected representatives, but also officers. So again, there's some of the initiatives that we've identified coming out of our census work. Lots of questions in the chat. I think one, Hannah, you touched on in your presentation, which was a comment or a question around whether political party endorsed candidates would help reduce some of these behaviours that we're seeing in the chamber. And I think you spoke about that when you talked about providing, well, I guess the assumption is that if you're a politically endorsed candidate who goes on to be elected, that there's been a vetting process of some kind and you've signed up to your own party's code of conduct in relation to that. Hannah, you talked about then the need to support those independent candidates who may not have gone through those similar processes. So I'm not sure if I've answered the question in the chat, but happy to open it up to the panel.
Catherine, if I can comment on that, one of the differences I found moving from the UK to New Zealand is in the UK, most people stand through a political party. And I've worked in councils that were sort of very hung with no, overall control there. Two things actually there, you were able to get people to focus on what they agreed on rather than what they disagreed on, but the party machine could handle the discipline. In New Zealand, everybody says there's no party politics in local government. Don't you believe it? It's there all the time. Everybody just hides. But there isn't that party machine to be able to manage their own people, which can make life a bit more difficult, but we just have to work in a different context.
Hannah.
Yes, I think that's a really interesting comparison, and I do think the I guess the political party machinery can be double-edged. Like a lot of the people we spoke to, criticized, regardless of which political party they were from, criticized their political party for not implementing the disciplinary process as effectively. But they do often get support from the political parties, and particularly the bigger ones in the UK. They can provide that legal support. They might not always, but the party machinery, we think, is particularly in the UK where it is very party political, is a really important avenue for this, addressing this risk management and so on. And there's something really interesting. We've been speaking to political party chairs recently, and there has been a shift of wanting to be seen dealing with abuse as part of kind of reputation management, which is quite positive in terms of they do want to do more in terms of dealing with abuse. It is the right thing to do anyway, but it's also part of that reputational risk management. But I would say that political parties, yes, they can be very important, but it comes to challenges as well. But yeah, very important space to keep working on.
Thanks, Hannah. I think Catherine would like to add to that as well, and then Diane.
Yeah, I've been puzzling over this question since Paul put it in the chat earlier, because I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, in terms of performance, you could look at some really well-led I don't know, well-led cities that seem to be thriving, and with strong kind of Labour leadership often in cities, and some others which really aren't. So it seems like the kind of the variable is not necessarily the strong role of a party, or the kind of the long tenure of a party. You see very bad behaviour between party factions in some areas. So there's something about the culture created by the party leadership. I think that's the really crucial thing, not whether party's there or not, because parties can behave well and behave badly, and they can lead well and lead badly.
Yeah. And Diane?
Yeah, I'm just concurring with Catherine's point, and Canada happens to be a beautiful test case for you all. We don't have political parties in local governments, and in fact, it's seen as a good governance measure, because introducing party politics would make it ideological in theory, and would make people reflect less on the actual issue at hand and more on party discipline and winning for their team. I mean, this is the thinking. So there's been a lot of resistance. It's one of our provinces is now introducing political parties in the two largest cities, again, to acknowledge what, like, I think it was Joe that was saying, everybody knows there's political parties and they're actually operating, so let's just name them, right? So I think it's more about the leadership and how those parties are operating than it really is about, it's not, in all cases, having political parties wouldn't necessarily be a good thing.
Can I jump in while we're on the subject of parties? And this might be Hannah, or this might even be Jonathan to respond to this one. I have been watching with interest how Reform UK has become a controlling force for a number of councils in the UK. I think one of the biggest in Durham, I think I might be right in saying. And messaging that's coming out that they're renaming council departments and refusing to undergo any sort of training that suggests that all people should be treated equally. Does this have the potential to undermine the sort of work that you're trying to do, Hannah, through your foundation?
I think we will see exactly how it develops. I think it's something that obviously we and others are looking at, and because Reform is a political party, we would still expect and encourage the recommendations around candidate screening and modelling good behaviour that have not necessarily always been followed. We are, as a kind of cross-party organisation at the Jacob Foundation, we really are keen to engage all political parties. And yeah, I think it will be interesting to see what happens at local level and the national level in terms of the, rhetoric, but also the actions. And I think it will be interesting to see what the kind of actions are, because right now it's still very current, and it's a lot, of rhetoric, and we'll see in terms of what happens in terms of actions and governing. I think that will be the, I guess, the test. Yeah, I don't know if Jonathan or Catherine have other thoughts on that kind of from a UK local government perspective.
Jonathan?
I mean, look, I'd echo what Hannah said. This is only 3 weeks, right? So it's very early. It's very early, and I think we don't yet know, how Reform will behave as a party, or indeed whether, what level of divergence there'll be between. So they now outright control of 10 councils, big councils like Kent and, as you say, Canada. Now, will they adopt the same approach in each of those places? We don't even know that yet. So I think it is early. It is early days, but I guess what I would say is, look, these people have stood for election and been elected, and they have the right to implement their policies within the frameworks of the legal duty of the council, as any other party would do. And I think we have to sort of respect that process. We like Joe Cox Foundation a cross party, and we'll be seeking to work constructively with councils of all parties, as we always have done. And I guess I would come back to the point, look, we have seen very, very bad behaviour and very, very good behaviour in politicians of all parties and none. I think, the party frameworks, I was just thinking about this question of political parties or not, as someone who has worked across both Australia and and the UK, I think on balance, I think more good than bad, because there are frameworks. Yeah, it's absolutely right, as Catherine said, that it's about the culture and the leadership in each place. But the party does give you a framework through which to at least potentially address those cultures. And just one other thing, just to be positive, we run training for councillors. We ran some training in a county council on resilience and management, and many reform councillors participated in that enthusiastically. So, I'm a professional optimist, and I remain such.
That's pleasing to hear. Always good to end on a positive note. Thank you, Jonathan. Catherine, do we have, we've probably got time to deal with one or two more questions, perhaps?
Yeah, look, there's so many comments in the chat. I'm trying to refine them, and I'm sorry we won't be able to get to all of them. I did want to reflect, though. It was interesting. Diane mentioned that there was a move in some councils away from a code of conduct. One of the reforms that recently was introduced in Victoria was a mandatory or a consistent code of conduct across all councils that councillors have been required to sign up to, and also mandatory ongoing professional development training. So again, that's been legislated for, which is a little bit different, Hannah, to what you were talking about in terms of, although training was a recommendation in your report, you mentioned that there were barriers to that because of the political nature of the role, i.e. these were elected representatives. Whereas in Victoria, we've actually legislated for that. There was a question in the Q&A from a councillor. There were a couple of comments about the weaponisation of codes of conduct. And the question was for Hannah again, were there any legislative measures that can effectively address harassment and abuse, perhaps where behaviour is lower risk than threats to safety?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's something that's particularly interesting in the online space. I was working on responding to a consultation from Ofcom, who have guidance about addressing violence against women and girls, and we're particularly interested in how they're kind of addressing women in public life. But something that remains challenging is when incidents are harmful, but it doesn't cross that criminal threshold. And I know from conversations with police and kind of security, that's always a challenging issue. And I guess I think part of that is, that is really good to hear about the kind of legislation around training codes of conduct. That might be something. And again, coming back to political parties, I guess they have strong codes of conduct. If you are harassing within the political parties, they should take that seriously. And that could be something that local government does as well. And in terms of, even if they don't have this specific duty of care, that they have for other employees. So I guess the short answer is like yes, but it is challenging in terms of figuring out exactly what the best mechanisms are. And I wonder if I could just quickly come back on the question about police, if that would be okay.
Please do.
Because I thought the kind of reflections in the chat about that some, cultures or communities might not respond well to police involvement. And I think that is a really important point. And a lot of the elected representatives we speak to, don't want police at their surgeries. And there's a real balance between kind of that openness, accessibility, and the kind of risk levels. So it's something that the kind of police and security forces are increasingly aware of. And so, for example, there's plainclothes officers are like near the surgery, or there's there's a panic button and the police are very nearby. So there's ways around it, but I think it is a really important point. And I think that there is that kind of ongoing concern about the kind of balance between security and kind of openness and democracy. So just to say it's really a really important point. And I know we don't have much time, but really interested in other people's reflections.
Jackie.
Thank you, Chris. If I can just add to that, and I think the point Hannah made is a really good one, because sometimes religious leaders with some communities are actually more effective than having police involvement. So it's really understanding the cultural norms, some of the influences in those communities, and how we get better behaviour in terms of civility. So yeah, I think it's not one size fits all. It depends on the situation.
Thanks, Jackie. It occurred to me, harking back to something Diane said earlier about moves to remove codes of conduct. It's a bit on a par with moves in the US to defund the police and not have them at all, isn't it? You know, it's a rather extreme reaction. So you don't have to comment on that. That's just a passing thought. Catherine, we might wrap this up. I was just thinking, unless you've got one last thing, I do want to just whip around the panel and ask for maybe a little positive takeaway to finish on. Are you okay for me to do that, or did you have something?
Absolutely. I think
Yeah,
a positive is a good way to end this conversation.
So I might just come to you firstly, Jo. You know, I did ask the question of Jackie earlier whether she had hope or confidence that we can work our way through these. Have you got a positive little takeaway perhaps you could share? Because I think some of your nuggets have already been adopted by people from earlier today.
Yes, I have. Look, it's still a privilege to be an actor in people's lives, and it's a privilege to serve. I have seen our communities begin to police their own social media rather than them, and that's why I say don't respond to confected outrage. Just deal with, that's one of my favorite phrases, confected outrage.
Mm-hmm.
Deal with the real issues that are there, and you will find that communities will police themselves. And my final nugget is when I get all this stuff, as you know, these social media people going bananas, I take back control by imagining them naked, typing away in a frenzy, and then I don't think about what they say about me. I just think, oh my goodness, I would hate to be those people. Take back control. It's a public service is beautiful.
You've reminded me of one of my earliest pieces of advice when I used to work in television, and occasionally you'd sort of you'd get the giggles about something. You'd be laughing, and my old boss used to say, whenever that happens, just imagine that you're sitting there naked, and people are not going to be that amused, and it stops the laughter straight away. Diane, a positive takeaway from you?
Well, I think a positive takeaway would be that, you know, culture deteriorated, political culture deteriorated to get us to this point, which means we can also turn the tide in the opposite direction. And in fact, there is research that shows that the tipping point for cultural transformation is only 25%. So if you can get 25% of the people in your community or on your council or in your city hall to advocate for different norms, for better norms, for greater civility, for a revived way of living and working well together, you can tip the dominant culture in your favor. And organizational culture can change within 5 years, and community culture can take up to a generation, but it's doable.
Okay, that gives us some hope for the future. Thank you, Diane. Hannah, anything to add?
Yes, on that culture change can happen. And I think something I haven't said but often say when I'm talking about our work with the Joe Cox Foundation is that we work on these issues of respectful politics and addressing abuse in politics, not actually because of the way that Jo was murdered, but because of the values in which she lived and her vision for respectful politics. And everyone who knew her talks about that. She loved a political debate, and it's about debating well and debating rigorously.
Yeah.
And she really believed in democratic institutions, and that kind of vision values really keeps me and kind of our community going.
Thanks, Hannah. Catherine, final positive thought?
Yeah, I think there's so much latent kind of energy and positivity in some of our councillors that, there's a real receptivity to kind of being supported and developed and getting that kind of pastoral support. And I think if we can kind of put the right infrastructure around people, then that will be great for them, but also enable them to go out and do more great work in our communities.
Thanks, Catherine. And Jackie, I know I asked you the question a while ago, but it was a while ago. Anything you'd like to add?
Oh, look, I just love local government, regardless of the challenges that we have. I was out the other day, I do a program called Walking My Shoes, and I went to our libraries and I did story time, and I saw our future generations, children from 2 to 5 out there. We were quacking like ducks and enjoying all the fantastic local government services. I think there's so much good stuff out there. I think future generations are the key, and the more we do civic education and community development with them, I think that's where the key is.
Indeed. Jonathan, if I can paraphrase your comment in the chat, recognising that most people are good and well-intentioned and well-behaved is really important to remember. Thank you for that. And Catherine, final comments and a wrap-up from you.
Look, thanks for that. I just, I'm delighted that what we've heard tonight on this truly global panel is a reinforcement of the work that the VLGA does and feels so passionately about. You know, one of our training programs is respectful disagreements, because it is about acknowledging the fact that we do sit around decision-making tables contemplating, you know, quite you know, important issues for the community, and we're not going to agree all of the time, but we can do that in a respectful and a civil way. So thank you very much to everyone who participated today, and Chris, thank you again for being an excellent co-host slash lead host. Always enjoy sitting next to you around these tables.
Thank you, Catherine. Very kind of you to say. Thank you to all of our panellists this evening. We have just hit our conclusion time, so we've brought this into land at exactly the right time. Thank you, Joe, Diane, Hannah, Catherine, and Jackie. Lovely to have had all of your insights. Thank you to Jonathan and the team at LGIU and Catherine and the team at VLGA. The session has been recorded for all those who've registered but couldn't join us live. You will get a link to this in the coming days. So that just leaves us to point out that we have another Global Executive Live panel coming your way in just a few weeks' time. What are we talking about this time? It's going to be growing the local economy. It's on Thursday, the 17th of July. That'll be 5:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, 8:30 a.m. in Britain, and wherever else in the world. We had someone from Ecuador on the session tonight. Unbelievable. Truly global indeed. So I hope you'll join us for that one. Until next time, thank you very much for joining us tonight or this morning, wherever you are, for our VLGA Connect LGIU Global Executive Live panel. Bye for now.